I was tightening the ribbon on a small gift box when the street outside broke into laughter. The sound drifted through my frosted window, sharp against the quiet hum of the heater. In the box lay nothing extravagant, just a simple scarf I'd planned to give myself, a reminder that even small kindness counts. This is just the beginning of how a single cruel joke turned into the most unexpected Christmas of my life. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I slipped on my coat and stepped out into the cold. Downtown glowed with lights strung across every shop window, carols spilling from speakers, children pulling their parents forward with mittened hands. I should have felt warmed by it all. Instead, the laughter cut deeper. A group of strangers passed me, their cheeks flushed with drink, their voices careless. One of them locked eyes with me, smirked, and tossed the words like a dare. Merry Christmas. It wasn't kindness. It was mockery. And it lit a fuse I didn't know I carried. So let's get into what happened after that moment. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. 3 little syllables. Merry Christmas. They were supposed to be warm, the kind of thing you say with a smile, maybe a nod, maybe even a touch on the shoulder. Instead, it landed sharp, like they'd flicked something at me just to see if I'd flinch. I kept walking, the scarf box under my arm, pretending I hadn't noticed. It's something I've done for years, and kept moving, as if ignoring pain somehow made it disappear. But my mind doesn't forget. It collects these moments, stores them in a quiet corner where the things I've swallowed whole keep piling up. The cold bit at my face as I turned onto the main street. The sidewalks were alive with couples carrying bags, kids tugging on parents, people rushing to last-minute dinners. I moved slower. I always do. My life has never been the kind you hurry through. I think that's why their joke stuck so hard. For them, it was nothing. For me, it was one more reminder of the way people see someone like me. Older, alone, carrying nothing that looks like holiday cheer. The truth is, Christmas has always been complicated for me. When I was young, it was a season of promises that fell apart. My father's drinking, my mother's exhaustion. Every year they swore things would be different. And every year we ended up with cheap lights strung half-heartedly in silence that lasted longer than the season itself. The only gift I remember clearly was a small wooden train that broke before I could play with it. I kept it anyway. Children keep broken things when they're given with hope. As an adult, the pattern didn't change much. The people I loved had their own families, their own plans, their own excuses for why my chair at the table stayed empty. I worked through holidays more often than not. Extra shifts, quiet evenings with the TV on low, pretending the flicker of commercials counted as company. I don't say this for pity. I say it because it explains why a stranger's laugh could feel like an old wound being pressed on. I carried that weight with me as I ducked into a small diner for coffee. It was warm inside, the kind of place that smelled like fried onions and burnt toast. The waitress behind the counter looked tired, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She slid me a cup before I even ordered. Maybe she saw the look on my face. Or maybe she just had the kind of kindness that doesn't need asking. I sat there, fingers wrapped around the mug, replaying the moment again and again. Their voices, the smirk, the way I pretended not to care. That's when something inside me shifted. I thought about all the times I had been dismissed, ignored, treated like background noise in someone else's life. I thought about the years I'd worked, the pennies I'd saved, the way I'd clawed myself into a position where finally I wasn't counting coins at the grocery store. And I realized something that startled me. I wasn't powerless anymore. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about rewriting the story. For once, I wanted to answer cruelty with something so unexpected it would leave a mark. Not the kind of scar I carried, but a mark of wonder. I wanted them to walk away remembering me, not as the person they mocked, but as the person who reminded them of what Christmas could mean. The idea came fast and wild. Cash. Real, physical, undeniable cash. Enough to make their laughter turn into silence. Enough to make them look at each other with wide eyes and shaky hands. I didn't know the number yet, but I knew it had to be big enough to matter. big enough to change the story. I left the diner with the thought burning in me like a secret. The street was colder now, the air sharper. I pulled my coat tighter and headed home, my steps quicker, more certain. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it, but I knew this Christmas wouldn't end like all the others. I wasn't going to be invisible, not this time. That night, lying in bed, the ceiling shadows moving with the headlights passing outside, I kept hearing their voices. Merry Christmas. It rang in my ears not as a blessing, but as a dare. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to excitement. Tomorrow, I decided, I would walk into a bank. Tomorrow, I would test what it meant to finally be the one holding the power to give. The next morning came colder than I expected. Sunlight pressed weakly through the blinds, striping the floor with pale light. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the traffic outside, trying to decide if I had really meant what I thought last night. The idea had felt bold in the dark, almost reckless. But morning has a way of shrinking things down, of making them seem impractical. Still, the thought didn't leave me. If anything, it grew louder. I had lived too many years letting moments pass, too many years convincing myself it was easier not to act. This time, I wasn't going to back away. I got up, dressed slowly, and folded the scarf box back onto the dresser. There was something bigger I needed to do. On the walk to the bank, memories pulled at me. It wasn't just last night's laughter that carried me forward. It was all the other nights, the empty chairs, the broken promises, the long hours where I told myself things would get better if I just endured. I thought about being 12 years old, staring out the window on Christmas Eve, waiting for a father who never showed. My mother tried to smile, but her eyes gave her away. That night, I realized waiting only made the disappointment sharper. The bank doors opened with a rush of warm air, and I stepped into the polished lobby. The floors gleamed. The faint sound of printers hummed from somewhere in the back, and the tellers smiled in that professional way that doesn't reach their eyes. I took a deep breath, walked up to the counter, and said the words I'd never imagined saying. I'd like to withdraw $50,000. The teller blinked, her smile faltering. She asked me to repeat it, and I did, steady and clear. She hesitated, then excused herself to find a manager. I waited there, hands resting on the cool counter, feeling the stares of people behind me. Part of me expected someone to laugh, to question whether I had that kind of money. That old habit of anticipating humiliation never leaves quickly. But no one said anything. They just watched. When the manager arrived, he looked at me like I'd asked for something outrageous. His voice stayed polite, but curiosity edged every word. May I ask what the cash is for? I shook my head. Personal reasons. It wasn't a lie. It was personal in the deepest way. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, disappearing into a back room. The wait felt long. My legs ached, my chest felt tight, and for a flicker of a second, I wondered if I should walk out. But then he returned, carrying stacks of bills in sealed envelopes. He set them down on the counter like they were ordinary, just another transaction. To me, it felt like holding years of sacrifice in physical form. The weight surprised me. Money looks thin when it's numbers on a screen, but in cash it's solid. Heavy, real. The envelopes barely fit into the worn leather bag I carried. I thanked them quietly and left, feeling the cold air slap my face as the doors closed behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Walking back, I couldn't help but drift again into the past. I remembered my first job, washing dishes until my fingers cracked from the water. I remembered eating instant noodles for weeks so I could cover rent. I remembered sitting in dark apartments, wrapping blankets around myself because heat was a luxury. Those years had shaped me, sharpened me. They had also made me careful. Careful enough that every extra dollar I earned was saved, tucked away, hidden like a secret. Now here I was, holding $50,000 in a bag, ready to hand it away. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years of guarding every penny, and suddenly I was planning to give it all to strangers. But that was the point. I wasn't doing this because I needed their gratitude. I was doing it because for once I had the choice, and choice after all these years felt like the greatest wealth. That evening, I returned to the same street where the words had been thrown at me. The light seemed brighter now, the air filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and cold metal from the lampposts. My heart pounded as I scanned the crowd. I didn't know if I would find them again, those laughing voices, those careless faces. But I told myself even if I didn't, I would find someone. Someone who needed to be reminded of what generosity could feel like. As I waited, my thoughts wandered again to the hollow Christmases of my childhood. There was one in particular that clung to me. I was 15. My mother had given me an envelope with $10 inside. She had apologized, her voice breaking, saying it was all she had left after paying bills. I told her it was fine, that I didn't need anything more. But that night, lying awake, I promised myself that one day I would know what it felt like to give without counting the cost. Now that day had come. The crowd thickened, the chatter rising as the night grew colder. I stood still, my hand brushing against the edge of the bag, waiting for the right moment. My heart was steady, but my breath felt sharp. For the first time in years, Christmas no longer felt like something happening around me. It felt like something I was about to create. I stood in the crowd, the bag heavy at my side, and realized this was the first Christmas Eve in decades that I wasn't waiting for someone else to make it meaningful. I wasn't standing by a phone, hoping it would ring. I wasn't staring at a door, wondering if someone might finally walk through. For the first time, I held the power to decide what this night would become. That thought steadied me. My hand rested on the zipper of the bag, the envelopes stacked neatly inside, each one filled with bills that represented years of saving, years of sacrifice, years of silence. The weight wasn't only physical, as it was emotional too. It carried all the nights I'd gone without so I could get by. It carried all the times I'd been told I wasn't enough, all the times I had been left out. Now it was mine to give away. I looked at the faces passing by, flushed from the cold, lit by shop windows and street lamps. Families huddled together, couples held hands, friends clutched cups of hot chocolate. And then there were people like me, walking alone, shoulders hunched, eyes set on the ground as if avoiding the world was easier than risking rejection. I saw them because I had been them. It struck me then how strange money is. For years, it had been the thing I chased, the thing that dictated what I could and couldn't do. Every meal, every bill, every choice seemed tied to whether I had enough. I had believed that more of it would bring safety, even happiness. And in a way, it had. But standing there with $50,000 in a bag, I realized money by itself meant nothing. It was what you did with it that gave it meaning. That's why I knew I couldn't just keep it sitting in a bank account. It had to move. It had to touch someone's hands. I thought back to the first paycheck I ever brought home. It wasn't much, just enough to cover groceries and part of the rent. But the pride I felt was enormous. I had earned it. I had created a little piece of security in a world that always felt unstable. Now, holding these envelopes, I wanted someone else to feel that same surge, to know that life could surprise them in the best possible way. The longer I waited on that street, the clearer it became. This wasn't about those young people who mocked me. Not anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about proving to myself that I could take all the bitterness that had built up in me and turn it into something else. Something useful. Something good. So I walked. Block after block, the bag bumping against my side, my eyes scanning faces, my thoughts racing. I passed by a man sitting against a brick wall, his head lowered, a cardboard sign in front of him. I thought about stopping, about handing him an envelope right then. But something told me to wait, to hold on until the right moment. This wasn't about rushing. It was about finding the exact point where the act would carry the most weight. By the time I reached the park at the end of Main Street, the crowd had thinned. The fountain in the center was dark, drained for the season, but the trees around it sparkled with strings of lights. I sat on a bench, my breath clouding in the cold, and watched as groups came and went. My thoughts wandered again to the past, to all the times money had defined me. There was the year I pawned my only watch to cover rent, the year I sold furniture just to keep the lights on, the year I skipped meals so a friend's child could have a birthday gift. Those memories weren't shameful to me anymore. They were proof of survival, proof that even when the world turned its back, I found a way forward. And now, with $50,000 waiting in a bag at my side, I felt the strangest mix of emotions. Pride, yes. Fear, absolutely. But more than anything, I felt ready. Ready to take everything I had endured and finally make it mean something more than survival. The city clock struck 8, the chimes echoing across the park. I stood, my legs stiff from the cold, and decided tonight was not about hesitation. I walked back toward the busiest part of the street, my pace quicker now. The bag felt heavier with each step, but in a way, that weight gave me purpose. Every block closer to the noise and light made my decision firmer. When I reached the corner where the laughter had stung me the night before, I paused. The memory of their faces, the smirk, the careless words, it all returned in a rush. For a moment, I almost let anger take over again, but I shook it off. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me reclaiming Christmas, reshaping what it meant in my life. I adjusted the strap of the bag, took a breath, and stepped into the crowd. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never forget this night. The crowd pressed in from every side, the noise of laughter, footsteps, and carols blending into one steady hum. I moved with it, the bag tight against me, trying to quiet the pounding in my chest. The night before, the words had cut me open. Tonight, I was determined to answer them with something larger than anger. I kept walking until I reached a spot near the corner where the lamplight stretched across the pavement. People passed quickly, too busy with shopping bags and dinner plans to notice the man standing still. That gave me time to breathe, to think, to prepare myself for what I was about to do. My plan was still simple, though it had shifted slightly since I first imagined it. At first, I had thought only of the group that mocked me. Now, after holding the money, after feeling the weight of it, I knew it wasn't just about them. It was about choosing the right people, the ones who would never expect it, the ones who carried the same invisible weight I had carried most of my life. The first person who caught my eye was a woman hurrying down the street, her coat too thin for the cold. A little girl clung to her hand, dragging her along toward a bakery window. The girl's eyes lit up at the sight of cakes stacked in the glass, but the mother shook her head, pulling her away gently. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she said. Not tonight. Not this year. I had heard those same words growing up. I reached into the bag, pulled out one envelope, and stepped forward before I could second-guess myself. "Excuse me," I said. The woman turned, startled, eyes wary. I held out the envelope. "For you." She hesitated, her gaze flicking from my face to the envelope, unsure whether to accept. Finally, she reached out, her hand shaking. She opened it just enough to see the bills inside, then froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The little girl stared, wide-eyed, clutching her mother's arm. I didn't explain. I just smiled and said, "Merry Christmas," the way it was meant to be said. Then I walked away. Behind me, I heard the girl ask, "Mom, what is it?" The mother whispered something I couldn't catch, her voice breaking, but I didn't need to hear. I knew. The act left me shaky, almost lightheaded. For a moment, I wondered if I had done the right thing, if she would believe it wasn't some cruel trick. But then I thought of the way her hand trembled, the way her child's eyes had widened, and I knew. That memory would outlast the doubt. I didn't stop there. The bag still held plenty, and each envelope felt like a piece of my past waiting to be rewritten. I moved slowly down the street, watching people, listening to snatches of conversation. I saw a young man in a faded uniform jacket sitting alone at a bus stop, staring at the ground as if the night belonged to everyone else but him. I slipped an envelope beside him on the bench without saying a word. His head snapped up as I walked away, his mouth falling open as he realized what he was holding. Next, I spotted an older couple pushing a cart of groceries, their pace unsteady. Their faces were lined with the kind of weariness I recognized instantly, the look of people who had stretched every coin to make the holiday possible. I stopped them, pressed an envelope into the woman's hand, and kept moving before they could argue. Each act made the bag lighter, but my chest heavier in a different way. Not the heaviness of burden, but of release. Every person reminded me of someone I had been, or someone I had known. It was like watching pieces of my own history reflected back at me. Only this time, I had the power to change the ending. As I moved through the night, I couldn't help thinking of the ones who had mocked me. Maybe I would still find them. Maybe I wouldn't. Either way, the gift had already grown bigger than their laughter. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about reclaiming a season that had always taken from me and finally letting it give something back. By the time the clock tower struck 9, the bag was nearly empty. I stood once more at the edge of the park, the fountain still dark, the trees glowing with strings of lights. The air felt different now, softer somehow. Not because the night had changed, but because I had. I sat on the bench, my hands resting on the worn leather bag, and thought about what had just happened. For years, I had believed Christmas was for other people, for families gathered around tables, for children ripping open presents, for couples exchanging gifts under twinkling trees. Tonight proved me wrong. Christmas could be whatever I made it. It could be standing on a cold street, handing envelopes to strangers who would never forget the night their lives changed. And maybe that was the real point. Not revenge, not even generosity. Just the reminder that even when life strips you bare, you can still choose how to give. The bag lay on the bench beside me, nearly empty, and for a moment I thought I was finished. I had handed out almost every envelope, and each one had taken a piece of weight off my shoulders. The park was quieter now, the flow of people thinning as families disappeared into restaurants and shops. Yet something inside me told me the night wasn't over. I leaned back, the cold wood pressing against my coat, and thought about what came next. I could go home, close the door, and carry the memory of what I had done like a secret treasure. That would have been enough, but I couldn't shake the image of their faces, the ones who had started all this with their mocking words. The smirk, the laughter, the casual way they had tossed a phrase that should have carried warmth. I had convinced myself this wasn't about them anymore, and yet part of me still wanted to finish what they began. I stood, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked back toward the busiest street. The lights still glowed bright, music spilling from doorways, the hum of voices rising. My steps slowed when I spotted them. The same group from the night before, clustered near the corner, their laughter just as careless. They didn't notice me at first, and for a second I wondered if I should keep walking. But my legs wouldn't move. I reached into the bag. Only a few envelopes remained, each thick with bills. My fingers brushed over them, and I thought about everything they represented. The hunger, the silence, the lonely nights, the years of working when everyone else was celebrating. And then I thought about the woman and her daughter, the young man at the bus stop, the couple with the grocery cart. For them, the envelopes had been hope. For these young people, maybe it would be something else. A lesson. A story they would carry long after the laughter faded. I stepped closer. One of them glanced up, his eyes narrowing as if trying to place me. Then his smirk returned. "Well, if it isn't Christmas, come early," he said, his friends chuckling. I didn't answer right away. I pulled 3 envelopes from the bag and held them out. Their laughter faltered. They exchanged confused looks. One of them reached out, half suspicious, half curious. He tore the flap open, peeked inside, and froze. The others leaned in, their voices dropping to hushed disbelief. I could see their hands shaking as they realized what they were holding. The smirks were gone now. The jokes had died in their throats. "Merry Christmas," I said. My voice was steady, almost calm. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then one of them stammered. "Why? Why would you do this?" I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Some things are more powerful left unsaid. I simply tightened the strap of the bag, turned, and walked back into the flow of the crowd. Behind me, their voices rose. Not mocking this time, but stunned, almost frightened. As I walked, a strange quiet settled inside me. I had done it. I had turned their laughter into silence, into something they would never forget. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about taking a moment that could have broken me and reshaping it into something else entirely. By the time I reached the edge of the park again, the bag was empty. I slipped it onto the bench and sat down, my breath heavy in the cold. My hands felt strangely light, as if I had set down not just the money, but years of carrying too much alone. I looked up at the strings of lights above the trees, their glow steady against the dark sky. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like Christmas was happening around me. I felt like I was part of it. Not because of what I'd given, but because I had finally chosen how to live the season. The faces of the people I'd helped floated back through my mind. The mother, the child, the young man, the couple, and even the group that had mocked me. They would all carry a story now. Maybe they would never know who I was. Maybe they would never tell anyone else what had happened. But they would remember. And so would I. I stayed on that bench a long time, long after the streets began to empty and the shops started closing. The city clock struck 10, its chimes echoing across the square. I thought about going home, about shutting the door behind me, but I didn't feel the need to rush anymore. For the first time in years, the silence waiting for me wasn't something to dread. It was simply peace. I sat on the bench longer than I intended, my hands resting in my lap, the empty bag beside me. The park had grown quieter, the earlier rush fading into the steady hum of late-night traffic and the occasional laughter drifting from a bar down the street. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pressed to move. There was nothing left to do, nothing to hold on to. I had given it all away. Eventually, I stood, stretching stiff legs, and began walking toward home. The streets were calmer now, shop lights dimmed, fewer people hurrying past. My steps echoed more clearly on the pavement. I thought about how different the night felt compared to the one before. Then I had been carrying bitterness like a stone. Tonight, I carried nothing, yet somehow felt heavier with meaning. As I passed the diner I had stopped in the previous evening, I paused. The same waitress was inside, wiping down a counter, her hair pulled back, her movements tired. I almost went in, almost slid onto a stool to order another coffee, but I didn't. I didn't need to replay the moment that had sparked all this. I had already lived the answer. Walking further, I noticed people bundled in coats, arms linked, smiles faint but steady as they shared stories. I watched them closely, not with envy this time, but with curiosity. For years, I thought being alone meant I had nothing to offer. Tonight proved the opposite. I had managed to create something lasting out of nothing more than a decision. When I reached the block where I lived, I slowed down. The building was the same as always. Dark bricks, narrow windows, the faint smell of damp stone clinging to the entryway. But stepping inside felt different. I wasn't dragging myself in after another day survived. I was carrying a memory, one that would outlive the weight of the bag. I climbed the stairs, opened my door, and let the silence wash over me. Usually that silence pressed down hard, filling every corner with reminders of who wasn't there. But that night, it wasn't a burden. It was space. Open, free, waiting to be filled with something new. I placed the empty bag on the chair by the door and stood in the center of the room for a long time, listening to the radiator click, feeling the air settle around me. I didn't feel regret, not for a second. Not even as I thought about how long it had taken to save that money. Every shift, every hour, every careful choice. Instead of mourning it, I felt something like pride. Not the kind of pride you boast about, the quiet kind, the kind that stays with you when you've done something that matters. I sat at the small table by the window, looking out at the faint glow of the street lamp, and let my mind wander back to the faces I'd seen. The mother and her daughter, the young man at the bus stop, the older couple pushing groceries. Even the group that mocked me, their shock would stay with them. Their questions would outlast their laughter. That was enough. It struck me then how simple the whole act had been. No speeches, no explanations. Just envelopes passed hand to hand, wordless reminders that life could turn suddenly. And maybe that was the real heart of it. Not the money itself, but the way it arrived. Unexpected, unearned, undeniable. I thought back to my own life, the years when one small break could have changed everything. If someone had slipped me an envelope when I was standing at a bus stop or staring into a bakery window, my story might have bent a different way. I had waited a long time for moments like that, and they never came. So tonight, I created them for someone else. I stayed there at the table for hours, the clock ticking quietly behind me. I didn't write anything down. I didn't call anyone to tell them. This wasn't a story I needed to share to feel its worth. It was mine to hold, the way some people hold on to photographs or heirlooms. When I finally lay down, the bed felt softer than usual, though nothing had changed. I closed my eyes, and instead of running through the regrets that usually filled the dark, I replayed the images of surprise, relief, wonder. I fell asleep not to the sound of laughter mocking me, but to the thought of lives shifting in ways I'd never see. Morning came quietly. Sunlight pooled on the floor, and I rose without the heaviness that usually came with the start of another day. My life hadn't transformed overnight. I was still in the same apartment, with the same work ahead, the same solitude waiting. But I had shifted something inside myself. I had proven that the story didn't have to repeat year after year in the same hollow way. I brewed coffee, sat with the mug warming my hands, and watched people hurry along the street below. They didn't know what had happened the night before. They couldn't see how the weight I carried was gone. But I knew, and that was enough. I watched the street from my window a long time, the mug cooling in my hands. Delivery vans idled. Neighbors shuffled by with scarves up to their noses, and a school bus flashed its lights at the corner. The world moved without noticing me, and for once that didn't sting. I planned a normal day, a shift later, bills to manage, chores to finish. Ordinary things, the kind that make up most lives. So let's get into what happened next, because days after a night like that can bend in strange ways. Before noon, I pulled on my coat and stepped outside. I wanted air, and I wanted to walk the same blocks with different eyes. The bakery door chimed when I pushed it open. Warmth, coffee, and sugar cut through the morning chill. People stood in line with pastry boxes tied in red string. At a table near the window sat the woman from last night with the girl. The child pressed a napkin flat, drawing stars with a dull pencil. The mother watched, her face softer than I remembered. She cradled a small cake. Not fancy, just enough. I thought about saying hello. I didn't. They didn't need a stranger to explain their good fortune. The moment belonged to them. I bought a plain roll and sat 2 tables away. The girl looked up once, then returned to her stars. I caught a few words when the mother called someone. "We're okay," she said, voice steady. "I can come by later. We can still make it work." She laughed once, low and relieved. I finished my roll, left a tip, and stepped back into the cold. At the bus stop, the young man in the worn jacket stood with a folder tucked under his arm. His hair was neater today, boots laced tight. He kept checking the time, then the number on the front of the building across the street. Interview, I thought. Maybe a first try. He didn't see me. Good. I hoped he never connected the envelope with anything but a door opening when he needed one. On the way home, I passed the corner where the group gathered. Only 2 of them stood there, shoulders bent toward each other, talking low. No jokes, no loud voices. When they noticed me, they didn't smirk. One nodded, almost a thank you, almost a question. I gave him the same small nod back. That was enough. We didn't owe each other more than that. Back upstairs, I put water on for more coffee and finally opened the small gift box on the dresser. The scarf lay folded exactly as I'd left it, wool soft under my fingers. I'd bought it for myself before any of this started. A small promise that I would not end another year without giving something to the person I live with every day. I wrapped it around my neck and looked in the mirror. The face looking back seemed older than the one I carry in my head, but the eyes were clear. Nothing sat in the bag anymore to claim my attention. The giving did that. The day settled into a rhythm. Laundry, dishes, a call to reschedule a dentist appointment I missed last week. Life doesn't pause so a memory can glow. It moves forward, and that is the point. Still, the night kept returning like a quiet drumbeat. I would be rinsing a cup and picture the older couple with their cart, or I would fold a towel and see the girls' pencil stars. In the afternoon, I took a notebook from a drawer and wrote down a few lines. Not names, not amounts, just details I wanted to remember. Park bench, thin coat, bus stop folder, grocery cart, corner laughter, then silence. I didn't write it to prove anything. I wrote it to keep myself honest, to remind the future version of me that one winter I chose action over resentment. The second day brought a small card under my door. No return address. No signature. Just 4 words in shaky handwriting. You changed our week. I turned the card over and over, thinking about who might have sent it. The mother? The couple? Someone else I hadn't even noticed? I set the card on the shelf above the sink. It didn't need to go in a drawer. Some truth should stay visible. That evening I walked again. Not with a bag this time, just with empty hands and easier steps. I passed a church where volunteers lined up bowls of soup. I stopped to help carry a crate inside. Nobody asked for my name. Nobody needed to know my story. We worked in the same rhythm for 20 minutes, then I kept going. In the glass of a dark storefront, I caught my reflection. I looked like any other person making their way through winter. That felt right. On the third day, I went back to work. The place felt the same. Same squeaky drawer, same clock with a slow second hand, same coworker humming off key. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. It wasn't a secret. It was simply mine. When I clocked out, I stood on the sidewalk and watched traffic feed into the main road, headlights sliding past. The street had given me a dare and I answered it. Standing there, I understood something I missed for years. Love doesn't always arrive as company. Sometimes it shows up as duty. Sometimes as a choice. That night, the phone rang. My sister's number. We hadn't talked since summer when a small argument became a long silence. I almost let it go to voicemail, then picked up. Her voice sounded tired, but warmer than I expected. We spoke about simple things first. Weather, her kids, the new job she started. Then she cleared her throat. I thought about Mom, she said. About all the Christmases we tried to patch together. I don't want to keep repeating old patterns. Neither did I. We didn't solve everything. Families rarely fix decades in one call. But we set a time to meet in January for breakfast. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my lap, feeling a door open where I hadn't even knocked. Change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it nudges. The week after that, the news ran a tiny story about mystery envelopes handed out downtown. No camera footage, no names, just a few quotes from folks who found cash when they needed it most. Reporters asked for tips. A radio host cracked a joke about a new kind of Santa. I lowered the volume and finished my tea. Let them guess. The city didn't need a face for this. It needed the memory to float around in the air a while, landing where it could do the most good. I thought about the phrase that started everything. People say it 1,000 times in December, often without intention. That night, a careless voice threw it like a pebble. I caught it and threw back an ocean. Not to drown anyone, but to wash something clean inside me. A single sentence can bruise. Another can heal. Money helped, sure, but the act mattered more than the amount. It said, I see you. I remember what this can be. On the final evening of the year, I wrapped the scarf tighter and walked to the water. The ferry horn carried across the dark, and gulls tilted in the wind above the pier. I leaned against the railing and watched ripples spread from the pilings. My breath rose and disappeared. I thought about the boy counting coins, pretending hunger didn't ache. I thought about the man who learned to expect very little and built a life anyway. I thought about the person who stepped into a bank and asked for something that once would have sounded absurd. I didn't make resolutions. I don't trust promises made on nights when everyone is high on the calendar turning. I chose something quieter. Next December, I'll do it again, I decided. Not the same way. Not necessarily with cash. Maybe with time. Maybe with rides to appointments. Maybe with food bought in bulk and portioned out with care. The shape can change. The habit will stay. When I headed back toward home, a couple passed me, cheeks red from the wind. The woman nodded and said it first. "Merry Christmas." The words landed simple and true. I returned them with warmth. No bitterness curled inside. I carried them all the way up the hill, through the door, and into the room where the scarf waited on the chair. I set water to boil and watched steam rise. My apartment looked the same as every other night. The radiator ticked. The clock hands moved. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed. I didn't need lights strung across my window to know I was part of the season. I'd already done the one thing I needed. I stepped out of my own shadow. I sat, opened the notebook again, and added one final line. Next year, start earlier. Look closer. Listen more. Don't wait for a dare. When I closed it, the card on the shelf caught my eye. "You changed our week." The words didn't brag. They didn't ask for more. They named something and left it there where I could see it whenever doubt tried to take over. I switched off the lamp. The room fell into soft darkness. I held the line in my head as I lay down. Before sleep took me, I pictured those strangers whose hands trembled when envelopes turned weight into possibility. I wondered how their stories might unfold from here. I didn't need answers. That was the best part. I finally learned to give and then let life take over. Christmas will come again, the same and not the same. If someone says the words to me on a street next year, I know what I'll hear. Not an insult. Not a dare. I'll hear an opening and I'll answer it with more than a reply. If my journey from bitterness to giving spoke to you, you'll be gripped by our next story. Follow the link for the unforgettable tale of a parent who told their children they were broke, only for a $1.2 million will to reveal the truth. Don't miss it.